Something strange has happened in the last 10 years. It's as if we're living on the other side of a mirror, looking at our old selves. Things look familiar, but not exactly. That mole on your left cheek is now on the right side. Everything behind you now is on the other side of the room. What was once deemed strange, immoral, and wrong is now normal, righteous, and correct. It makes you wonder if the world really did end back in 2012. When the world started to change, some didn't even notice the shift. It was as if they had awakened to a new world, only wondering what had happened. Some embraced the change because this was the world they had always dreamed of. But for others, this change felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Not because she was searching, but because she was pushed. It's 2021 now, almost the 10-year anniversary of the so-called end of the world. Back then, people were freaking out that the end was nigh, and this time it wasn't coming from the Christians. Back then, the big debate was over intelligent design versus evolution, and YouTube was becoming something people called their full-time job. The economy was screwed up, which resulted in the Occupy Wall Street movement. That was 10 years ago. And that's when I noticed the turning of a new world. Feminism, race theory, gender theory, body positivity began to flood online conversations on places like Tumblr. It called itself critical theory, a philosophical approach to culture, history, and science, teaching people to challenge the old social norms. Re-examining American history and culture through the lens of the oppressed wasn't mainstream. The way Americans learned history in the past created a people who didn't understand anything outside of their own borders. In other words, an American idiot. But as critical theory became more common, it found itself being challenged online by the skeptic community, mostly comprised of atheists. Those on YouTube at the time who had platforms centering around critical theory, focusing on feminism, let's call them the woke community, found themselves consistently under the attack of the skeptic community. Before, the biggest threat to the world for the skeptic community was creationism being taught in schools. Those were the good old days. Many of them considered it child abuse. But with this new threat to science on the horizon coming from their own side, the community split. One side remaining the skeptic community, while the other side called themselves Atheist Plus. Meaning atheists plus feminism plus anyone else who was atheist but didn't feel like they belonged. The woke side wanted to bring critical theory to the forefront of the American identity. I don't think anyone had a problem with this. The issue was that they were tampering with science and logic, and terms like social justice warrior and feminazi were thrown around. For me, this is where the culture war began. Before Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and Blair White dominated the conversation online against critical fill-in-the-blank theory, there were people like Sargon of Akkad, Thunderfoot, Karen Strawn, and so many other YouTubers whom consistently challenged channels like Feminist Frequency, Lacey Green, and Steve Shives on their different factions of wokeness. But just when the chatter about microaggressions and safe spaces were dying down, this woke ideology moved from an internet discussion to a mainstream media fact. New terms like cisgender and BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color, were used as if these terminologies were always a normal part of the English language, leaving many people confused of what these words even meant. This turning, for those who had been fighting for a voice at the table, was not something that had happened overnight, but for most people, it did. Yet, as this new world emerged, something about it all felt familiar. People were pointing out how the woke movement seemed to be a bit cultish. The discussion of the ideology went from feeling like you could disagree and maybe lose a friend, to losing your entire life if you didn't line up perfectly to the new world's view. Any evidence of doubt in the ideology caused people to self-censor in order to not lose their job. Ironically, the same people who rejected religion for its dogma had accepted a new religion. The religion of social justice, with legalism but no God. The push for ideological purity seeks out heresy in what we now call cancel culture. It sounds stupid, but when it means you can't feed your family because you don't think there's 72 genders, you start to wonder if this is the beginning of a new dystopian world. I know what you're thinking. How can an ideology with no God be religious? Ryan Long's new video called The Church of Woke uses comedy as a way to point out how modern activists are no different than religious people who seek to cast out those who fall out of line. In Aisha Akambi's video called The Problem with Wokeness, she points out how wokeness has robbed people of compassion and replaced it with moral superiority. She compares progressivism to a religion.
At this point, it becomes clear that progress has become less of a movement and more of a religion. Sins are problematic opinions for which there's often no redemption. Confession is the public apology, and the high priest is whoever has the most followers.
I don't think re-examining or reconstructing history and culture is a bad thing. History is told by the victors, and hearing the other side of history gives us a better understanding of the world. Yet wokeness, ironically, has only recreated a new culture that pushes an ideology that platforms American issues as the world's issues, making Americans appear more self-absorbed and disconnected from the world than before. Wokeness champions itself as the leader in decolonization, as it colonizes the world with its own ideology, forgetting that one of the sins of wokeness is pushing your culture on others. Being a part of a Christian community, I know a religious person when I see them. We call it the religious spirit. It's when someone uses their self-righteousness as a way to hold themselves up as spiritually superior over others by putting others who appear to be less spiritual down. This is why you hear Christians say it's not about religion, but a relationship. But as I've become older, I now see in this new era that spirit also operates in ideology as well. Where there is a performance of righteousness, virtue signaling, and the pointing of others' unwoke sins, that is the religious spirit. People are ready to show off their holiness via screenshot tweets of sinners and video/photo shoots of themselves being part of the good fight. I mean, how else would you know someone is a good person if they didn't show you? An artist friend of mine, Gabrielle Solange, defines religion as a formula people create in an attempt to mass produce something that can only be born of an individual's vulnerability and authenticity. Famous ideologies and religions start from individuals seeking truth, using their teachings or media as a way of expression in order to help inspire others. Instead of letting those teachings inspire us, influential people create a dogma from it, taking advantage knowing others look to them for direction, becoming what Jesus calls a generation of vipers. The religious spirit is in the human heart, and anyone can fall prey to it. We thought that if we had no religion, wars would stop. But as the last bloodiest century in human history has taught us, religion was never the problem. It was always us. With no religion, we just exchange old beliefs for new ones. Communism, fascism, feminism, anarchism, atheism, conservatism, now wokeism. Blaming religion is a scapegoat so that we as a human society didn't have to see our true selves in the mirror. Religion no longer plays a role in controlling the narrative of what makes a good person in our society. The moral high ground moved from the old religious elite to the new religious elite. Social media influencers whose only qualifications is having a lot of followers. The religious spirit was a term Christians created from Jesus' teaching as a way to stay accountable from falling into being inauthentic, so that those who focus on Jesus' actual message have to reform their heart daily. Christianity started reforming itself, first breaking away from the religious control of Catholicism in the Middle Ages and going through the spiritual awakening movement in the last 300 years. The battle of not becoming a religious fanatic isn't hard, but it takes humility. A religious fanatic is not the same as a Jesus freak. A Jesus freak, although may be annoying and believes in things you don't agree with, still has love for those who aren't believers because they see others just as they see themselves. Versus a religious fanatic seeks to rid the world of evil by any means necessary. That's really the cure to the self-righteous religious spirit found throughout history. The cure is humility, not humility for show and tell. As long as we have a mind, there will always be those seeking truth, discovering better ways to be a good person. Just don't find yourself becoming the new woke religious fanatics.
This idea of purity and you're never compromised and you're always politically woke and all that stuff. You should get over that quickly. The world is messy. There are ambiguities. There is this sense sometimes of the way of me making change is to be as judgmental as possible about other people. And that's enough. Like if I tweet or hashtag about how you didn't do something right or used the wrong verb, or then I can sit back and feel pretty good about myself because, man, you see how woke I was? I called you out. You know, that's not activism. That's not bringing about change. You know, if all you're doing is casting stones, you know, you're probably not going to get that far. That's easy to do.